Last time, we discussed the strongest moves in competitive Pokémon, that being of the hazards, and this week we set out to finish what was established and delve into the full history of hazards in competitive Pokémon. Keep in mind that this is the second part to what was originally intended to be one long video, so anything explained last time won't be explained here. Watch at your own discretion. ORAS added Sticky Web, and you can ignore it as not a single good Pokemon ever got the move. Despite this, I'll still explain what it does. The move lowers the speed of a Pokemon who switched into it by one stage. Essentially, this is the premier hazard for Hyper Offense teams, and since it is such a popular team style, it still sees use. But since no user of the move has ever appeared in OU, it will be neglected for the rest of the video. As for Stealth Rock, it would be impossible to neglect it. As such, there are many great users, but unlike DPP in Black and White, there is no user who is truly a cut above the rest. As such, I'll simply be listing the users and how they perform with the move. Azelf is not a real Pokemon. It's only OU because of a tournament taking place at the end of the generation, which necessitated the use of the Hyper Offense teams that Azelf was most prevalent in. Chansey only uses Stealth Rock on teams which otherwise couldn't fit it. The same goes for Mega Diancie and Excadrill. Clefable is a great Stealth Rock setter, packing Recovery and Soft Boiled, support in Thunderwave, an incredible ability in Magic Guard, and a way to piss off Ferrothorn with Flamethrower. While Ferrothorn is not as good, with the removal of Permanent Rain making it far more wary of fire-type attacks, and the addition of Defog making its hazards less oppressive, it's still a great Stealth Rock setter. Hell, Stealth Rock isn't even its main hazard, as it's still bulky enough to prefer the far more rare Spikes. Garchomp is one of the best Stealth Rock setters in ORAS. It can run offensive sets which scare off Defog users, or run Tank Chomp, one of my favorite sets, one which gives Garchomp some extra bulk while still having the ability to threaten out Pokemon with its naturally high attack stat, and phase Pokemon with Dragon Tail while punishing physical attackers with Rough Skin and Rocky Helmet. Being one of the most versatile Pokemon in ORAS, Heatran is one of the easiest Pokemon to use Stealth Rock on, as it easily switches into a variety of Pokemon. It's because of this that even offensive sets love using the move. Hippowdon retains its role from DPP as a bulky setter. Having U-turn and a steel typing, Jirachi once again proves its worth as a Stealth Rock setter. Landorus Therian has the perfect tools for a support Pokemon. It has U-turn, Intimidate, an Earthquake immunity, and an attack stat to spam Earthquake with. It's because of this that it's one of the most reliable Stealth Rock setters in the entire metagame. Tyranitar makes a good Stealth Rock setter both on sand teams and teams which need extra pursuit support. Now to the Spikes users though, there's only one to discuss. Well, technically two, but I've already discussed Ferrothorn. And this Pokemon is, of course, Garmory, who hasn't changed all that much. To finish it off then is Toxic Spikes, which, once again, is competitively irrelevant. The hazard removal part of this will all be far more interesting though, as a buffed Defog would completely change how hazard removal would play out from then on. The move, of course, is not blocked by Ghost-type Pokemon. In theory, it could lose to Magic Bounce users since it is a status move, but one of the mechanics prevents that from happening, as Defog gets rid of both sides' hazards. I'm not a big fan of using the move because of this, however, it cannot be understated both how good it is and how necessary this aspect is, as removing hazards for free would completely break the game. Despite how good this move is though, its distribution is quite limited, which makes the move hard to fit on quite a few teams. It also lowers the opposing Pokemon's evasion, which may not seem like much until you've realized that Bisharp and other Defiant users can get an attack boost out of it if they switch into the move, giving it yet another weakness. Despite this, there are still some Pokemon who decide to use the move, the best of which, at least I consider to be, is Zapdos. Not only is it bulky with a solid typing, roost, and decent offensive stats as well, but it also gets its main claim to fame with its pressure ability. Now, PP is something we rarely discussed. This is because it was irrelevant. Rapid Spin has a significantly above average 64 PP, which meant that Rapid Spinners tended to have great matchups against hazard setters, at least in theory. Meanwhile, Defog has a far less favorable 24 PP. The reason why this is important is because every hazard in the game has 32 PP, meaning that defog PP can easily be stalled out if you just keep on spamming hazards. This means that defog users cannot use defog when a hazard setter is facing one. I find this to be a cool interaction, particularly because it makes pressure a genuinely great ability. Since the ability doubles the amount of PP your opponent's moves take up, it means that Zapdos can switch into hazard setters and get a defog up for free, forcing the hazard setter to switch out. This is huge when hazard setters are well known for how they can repeatedly set hazards up. This change of the meta being a direct result of defog. Despite all this, defog wasn't just dominated by Zapdos, as this rock weakness in particular is a pretty notable flaw for it. Along with that, its defensive stats were only just good enough. So the other Pokemon to compete for that title would be Latias and Latios. Now, I'm not knowledgeable enough on it here to know about Latias, but you should absolutely not use defog on Latios. This isn't just some dumb ramble either. Good players like BKC agree with me on this. The reason for it being 4 move slot syndrome, and that there are moves which Latios does a far better job at using, but also that such an offensive Pokemon whose time is limited by Life Orb should not waste his talents on such a defensively oriented move. That's why it generally works better on Latias than Latios, as it has far more defensively inclined stats. So to get to a good defog user then, Mew does a great job with its lack of a Stealth Rock weakness, unique access to Will-O-Wisp, soft-boiled, and well-rounded stats. Utility Mega Scizor sets can use defog, but Pursuit and Swords Dance are generally preferred. Skarmory is unique for being able to compress the role of a Spikes user and a defog user into one set. But as this series has been constantly proving, role compression just isn't good enough, especially when Skarmory has such a great move pool. So, after all that, I'd say there's only 2 truly good OU defoggers, in Mew and Zapdos. Although, chances are I'm probably wrong in this assessment. Hopefully the Rapid Spinners can pick up the slack. Funnily enough, minus Tentacruel, we have the exact same Rapid Spin Pokemon to analyze. Excadrill is still great. It can fit the move onto Choice Scarf sets, or build a set around it, using its good HP stat and typing to make a bulkier set that can use Rapid Spin throughout the course of a game. Meanwhile, Starmie is once again the icon of Rapid Spin for reasons I've mentioned countless times already. At this point, it's hard to think of an introduction. You know the gist by now. The only major change was defog being more easily accessible. This is important though, as I'd say this is the first generation where hazards aren't mandatory. Now, it's not like Gen 8 where you can just say lol imagine, but hey, it's something at least. Despite this, hazard setters still have their place, as many of defog's previously mentioned weaknesses can still haunt it. To get this out of the way, Sticky Web and Spikes are once again irrelevant. Well, for the first time since DPP, Toxic Spikes actually do have a place, even if it is only on one Pokemon. Greninja can use it on a Suicide Lead set, in conjunction with Spikes. Granted, when Greninja has so many other sets and is generally considered one of the best Pokemon in the tier, it just seems like you're wasting it if you go for that set. In that case, it might be better to look at Toxapex, who has Toxic Spikes as one of the many options available to it. Well, now we can get back to the relevant hazards, starting with Stealth Rock. Chansey, Mega Diancie, Ferrothorn, Gliscor, and Jirachi are all Pokemon I have nothing new to say about. Clefable, on the other hand, now uses Stealth Rock on its physically defensive Calm Mind set, likely because it can afford it, and also so it can wall defog users. Excadrill now uses Stealth Rock exclusively as a Suicide Lead, as its ability to threaten other hyper-offense teams with both Stealth Rock and Rapid Spin is huge. Also, Mold Breaker helps it set up against Magic Bounce users, which I should have mentioned ages ago, but is even more important on this set. Tank Chomp once again returns with its lead Guard Chomp set being rebranded, with a Z Crystal to help it threaten teams even more. Mega Garchomp finds its first niche with Stealth Rock, having a mixed set which can poke unique holes into an opposing team. Stealth Rock is largely optional on specially defensive Heatran sets, but Z-move variants don't need to worry about 4-move slot syndrome, so it always sees use on those. What makes Komomo so good is how its Z-move allows it to be threatening while setting up Stealth Rock. In that case, it's similar to Garchomp, even having a tank set of its own. The reason to use it over Garchomp then would be its ability to switch into Ash Greninja. Landorus Therian adds a new set in offensive Z-move, which slaps on Stealth Rock as its stab combination is all it really needs to sweep or break walls. Mega Swampert only really needs 3 moves, so it can do well as a Rain Team Stealth Rock setter. Instead of being used by Tyranitar, Stealth Rock is mainly used on Mega Tyranitar, likely being due to power creep. Now that we have Stealth Rock out of the way, we can now move on to Spikes. That's what I would say, except for the fact that Ferrothorn and Skarmory haven't changed at all. Thankfully then, Greninja rose down from the heavens to become the new King of Spikes. Of course, there's that Suicide lead set I mentioned earlier, but it also uses spikes on literally every other set. Greninja has 3 sets which use it in conjunction with the ability Protean. Protean is an ability which changes the user's typing based on the move they just used. Because of this, Greninja would turn into a ground type when using spikes. While Greninja is too frail to take advantage of any of ground type's resistances, it can take advantage of the electric type immunity it has, which basically means that if you play your cards right, you can get a free layer of spikes up if you predict your opponent will use an electric type attack. This is what makes it so good. That's not all though, as even without Protean, Ash Greninja even uses the move. What I'm about to say about Ash Greninja also applies to the Choice Scarf Protean Greninja, by the way. With that note made then, what makes Spikes so good on Choice Greninja as a whole is that since they force so many switches, it allows the user to use Spikes on a Pokemon that walls them, which does far more damage over the course of a game when compared to any other move that they could have used that turn. So that was a lot of Greninja. So what Pokemon thwart Greninja and other Pokemon like it? Well, as always, they're Defog and Rapid Spin users, so let's discuss them once more. Mega Charizard Y can use Defog, but Solar Beam is just better. Gliscor is good as a Defog user for the same reasons it's good as a Stealth Rock user. Landorus Therian can easily slap Defog onto Choice Scarf sets. Utility Megalodios sets can be quite good at using Defog on teams that would otherwise struggle to fit the move. Pelipper is the perfect rain setter, and its ability to use Defog only adds to that. Rotom Wash was already a great utility Pokemon, and Defog also only added to that. Serperior can now fit Defog onto Choice Scarf sets, at the cost of the seemingly important hidden power Fire. Beating Heatran and Ash Greninja, Tapu Fini is arguably the best Defog user of the generation. A Stealth Rock weakness sucks, but Tornadus Therian quite literally has everything else. There's a reason why it's the modern poster child of Defog. It has great stats, great stab, knockoff, and even U-turn to make it the beacon of utility. I didn't even mention Regenerator either, which is what truly solidifies its position. As for Rapid Spin, all that's left is Excadrill, who uses Rapid Spin on every set due to how unique of a quality it is, given how everything else has been obliterated by power creep. Heavy duty boots. Those words are enough to give me nightmares. Despite this, I have exaggerated their negative effect on the metagame, as hazards still have a place in OU despite their existence. Here we'll be looking at the hazard setters to survive the heavy-duty boots invasion. To do that though, we must first discuss the fall of Stealth Rock and the rise of Spikes. To do this, I must explain what heavy-duty boots does, as it's an item that makes the user completely immune to all forms of hazard damage, which is something I lost my brain cells to while reading. Personal hatred aside, the Pokemon to use the item are Stealth Rock weak Pokemon and Stally assholes. We're just gonna talk about the former though, as with a big part of what made Stealth Rock so powerful now completely negated, as the only Pokemon who now take damage from it are Pokemon neutral or resistant to the move. This, of course, isn't always the case. Cephalon, Pelipper, and Alolan Ninetales are all OU Pokemon weak to Stealth Rock who don't run heavy-duty boots, and as such are vulnerable to the move, but that's less than half of them, with one of them not even caring about its weakness. This generally means that since Stealth Rock won't hit the Pokemon it needs to anyway, that you should instead run Spikes, which doesn't need to worry about resistances like Stealth Rock does, and can become more powerful with multiple layers. Plus, since flying types run heavy-duty boots anyway, it's not like Spikes users had to worry about them to begin with. You get my point by now then. Although I should also say that it's not so black and white. Stealth Rock is still a good move which punishes the important Pokemon who don't run heavy duty boots. Plus, even though it's not too reliable of a strategy, knockoff spam can help you remove the item. I say this because even though the move is absurdly broken, heavy duty boots users can simply play around it. Because of this, let's analyze the few Pokemon who still use the moves and what makes them so good. Clefable can fit Stealth Rock onto its utility set, being so good because of how well Magic Guard allows it to set up on the many passive Pokemon of the meta. Tank Chomp refuses to die, and I'm so glad. Landorus Therian continues to run Stealth Rock in an attempt to make it less passive. Mew uses Stealth Rock as a suicide lead, but in conjunction with Spikes, which don't worry, we will discuss that soon. The Tyranitar runs Stealth Rock on its specially defensive set, with its rock typing giving it a good matchup against the mostly flying type Defog users, making it a lot easier for it to pull off a Stealth Rock. Along with its unique qualities allow it to be just as good a special wall as always. So, that's it. Gen 8 OU has 5 viable Stealth Rock users, a far cry from prior generations. Despite this, there's a whole host of UU Stealth Rock setters who are viable in OU, such as Excadrill, Paladon, Mamoswine, Nidoking, and Nihilego. Not only that, but despite not being mentioned on the Smogon website, Bisharp, Blissey, and Heatran can also use it, with Blissey and Heatran being especially notable since they can run anything. That's not to say that they or the UU setters are staples or anything though. I imagine you can pluck Pokemon like these in any generation. It just so happens that my friend Stupidum is especially knowledgeable about this generation, and for that, I have to give him all my thanks. That's all nice though, but what about that return of Spikes I mentioned? Well, I was kind of exaggerating, as there's only 2 Spikes users. But unlike Stealth Rock users who need more than that to just be useful, Spikes are a lot more central to the kit of Ferrothorn and Mew. Now, Ferrothorn never changes, so we have little to discuss with it. Mew, on the other hand, exemplifies my point perfectly. Given how Mew has the move pool to run virtually any set it pleases, its sets shift depending on what the demand in that meta is. In Gen 6, that demand was Defog, given how few users of the move existed. Meanwhile, in Gen 8, that demand is Spikes for the same reason. It doesn't mean that Spikes aren't useful, it simply means that Spikes are rare, which adds up as the move has had far less users than Stealth Rock over the course of its history, given how the move was never made a TM. That's not even to say that Mew is meta-defining or anything. It almost never is. This is more so a point about Spikes as a whole. So, what does Mew even do? What it always does. Utility. Along with that, it has the suicide lead set I mentioned earlier. As for other hazards, Toxapex can still run Toxic Spikes, but we've already mentioned that. So with hazards out of the way, I'm sure you're ecstatic to see me get angry at heavy-duty boots once again. But that'll have to wait as we discuss defoggers and rapid spinners once again. To get the latter out of the way fast, Regieleki is the only rapid spin user in OU. But oh wait, it fell to UU like it always does. Why do these videos always have to be outdated? Anyways, given how god-awful its move pool is, it often opts for the move, finding opportunities to against the ground types that are forced to switch into it. Not only that, but it makes for a good dose of utility on its dual screen set. Despite being UU2, I'd be remiss to forget about Excadrill and how useful it continues to be, being a Pokemon who runs Rapid Spin on almost every set to stand out. As for Defog, this is when things get wild. I say this because it's the beginning of the reign of Corviknight. Remember when I praised Zapdos for having pressure? Do you also remember how despite that, it had some pretty clear flaws? Well, Corviknight throws all that out the window. Here we have what is easily the greatest Defog user to ever exist. Have you wondered what Skarmory would look like with even better overall bulk and attacking prowess? Well, that's Corviknight. No wonder it's such a prevalent force in the metagame. As for other users, they're also really good. Of course, Corviknight doesn't exactly fit onto every team, so there's still more to discuss. Pelipper is the same as always. Same goes for Tapu Fini and Tornadus Therian. Zapdos returns as a Defog user, with its static ability differentiating it from Corviknight as a uniquely annoying physical tank. Outside of that, though, that's all. I thought there'd be more defog users, but with the decreased demand in hazards, I guess it only makes sense. Like, sure, there's more niche users like Dragonite, Landorus, Therian, Skarmory, and Volcanion, but I hope you get my point regardless. In that case, then, all we truly have left to discuss is heavy-duty boots. There's not actually too much to discuss, though. As I've mentioned previously, there's two types of heavy-duty boots users in Stealth Rock Week Pokemon and pivots. The pivots will take longer to discuss, so let's start with the Cut and Dry. The Pokemon who use the item to avoid their Stealth Rock weakness are Dragonite, Tornadus Therian, Victini, Volcanion, Volcarona, and Weavile. Now, though, I want to explain how it made these Pokemon better, avoiding the boring explanation of simply stating that it did indeed make a Pokemon better. For Dragonite, the change allowed it to more easily abuse Multiscale, an ability which decreased the damage of an opposing hit by 2 times, but only when at full health, something that Stealth Rock, of course, didn't allow. It's because of this that it's not only a better sweeper, but now has an easier time using utility sets which take advantage of its more defensive qualities. Weavile, on the other hand, uses Heavy Duty Boots on Swords Dance sets, but can opt out of the item with Choice Band sets. With that all covered, then, we can now uncover the pivots. The goal of a pivot is to provide utility until it switches out. Since they switch a lot, they would lose more health if they decided to use leftovers instead of heavy-duty boots. That's the line of logic, and it's because of this that they're so strong in the meta. Pokemon to take advantage of this are Blissey, Buzzwole, Mew, Slowbro, Dragapult, Tapu Koko, Tyranitar, and Zeraora. Now there's 3 different subcategories of these. Blissey and Slowbro are defensive pivots, Dragapult, Mew, Tapu Koko, and Zeraora are offensive pivots, meanwhile Buzzwole and Tyranitar aren't pivots at all, which is why they're the only Pokemon mentioned to have the item be optional. So, ignoring those two then, I hate dealing with these pivots so much. It's because they just refuse to die, even though they generally lack reliable recovery. Seriously though, Slowbro and Blissey just are not okay. To get back to the point though, the point of Heavy Duty Boots was to make up for how stupid it was that Charizard would instantly lose to Stealth Rock. However, the existence of these pivots has shown that they didn't fix the problem, but instead made a new one. God damn, I feel like every day gives me a new reason to hate this tier. But if it's your cup of Sinisty, then so be it. I truly don't care if you like playing the tier. I mean, it's just a game after all. So with that said, I sincerely hope that you enjoyed the video. I'm glad that after a month of waiting that this series can finally be put to rest, especially with just the colossal amount of effort I put into it. Unfortunately though, I must confirm my switch to a bi-weekly uploading schedule, as uploading weekly while making videos this long and high effort is quite literally impossible, given how I have to both juggle this with school. I also hope that doing so will make it so that I can one day not have to rush out content like I am right now, as I feel like all of my focus at home has been put into this channel, when I know that I need more than that. In that case, I guess this is goodbye until I upload in the next 2 weeks, so, see ya, I guess.